And just so you know, all of our workshops are available on our YouTube channel, and we do have people kind of streaming in now. So we'll anticipate a few more people coming, but we're other than that, we're ready to get started. And I'll start by saying to our audience, thank you all for being here, and to our presenter. I don't know if all of you have had a chance to read the bio of our guest today. I'm so grateful that he's here in the last workshop of the summer semester at the Rec Innovation Lab. Al Bsharah is an amazing guy. I'm so glad that I got the chance to meet him, and I'm so glad to see the work that he's doing to really revolutionize funding for early stage ventures and founders who before might not have had actual access to funds. He's making it possible for them to get funded, and so it's exciting. It's exciting. You know, ever since I started teaching entrepreneurship, I've known that this was an issue, and I like to see somebody addressing this. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for being here with us today, Al. And if you'd like to share your screen, I think we're pretty much ready to go. Or any announcements on our end, Stephen, Angela?
Be on the lookout for a survey that I'm going to be placing in chat later so we can give feedback to show Al how awesome he is.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephen. All right, Al, it's all you. Take it away.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for the incredibly kind introduction. I hope I can live up to it. But I am definitely excited to be here and excited to talk a little bit about fundraising and how things are a little bit different than maybe they used to be. So quick agenda, you know, I talk very briefly about me, a little background on myself so you understand who's doing some talking here. We'll dive into, are you ready to raise? And then once you decide if you are ready to raise and you realize if you are, then there's some areas we'll talk about on preparing for a fundraise and then executing the fundraise. What I'd really like to do though, because you know, you're all at different stages and different areas, is I'd love for you all to really prepare questions, because I don't know what you want to cover. So I've got a smattering of things, and it's a pretty broad strokes in the time that we have here. So I'd love to spend a lot of time on that Q&A. So please feel free to get those questions ready for when we have a Q&A session. So real quick.
Oh, sorry, I was just gonna say, Al, if anybody does put anything in the chat, we will monitor the chat and we'll get to them at the end. So yeah. Awesome.
That's great. So super fast about me. I grew up in the Detroit area. I was an electrical engineer by degree. I worked in the auto industry. You know, a lot of you will hear me joke. That's pretty much what everybody does in Detroit. And so that's what I did as well. And after a couple of years of that, I decided that it was time to get a change of scenery and a change of industry and kind of a change of pace. And so I moved to San Diego, and this is back in 1998, to pursue my beach volleyball career. Not really, but to move to San Diego and get that change of pace. So after that, I joined a company as a second employee. We grew it to 50 people. We sold it. And that was kind of the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey. And so for the next 20 some years, I was an early stage founder or operator in companies. My first company, I started in the early 2000s. I made a ton of mistakes. I did all kinds of things wrong. But I learned from them, and in some cases I learned much later once I went through some programs like Techstars and the Founder Institute, very similar to some of the programs that a lot of you are going through. And I learned why I made those mistakes and was mentored incredibly heavily by really, really smart people who have been there, done that many, many times over, and were so much smarter than myself. And so that changed me in a big way, not just as an entrepreneur, but kind of as a person in general, to realize that these folks are willing to give their time and give so much to me. And so my next company, I did much better. I sold it to Seismic Software, which is a very fast growing unicorn here in San Diego. I started Interlock Capital and been doing that for about a year now, really 8 months full time and a little bit of a side hustle prior to that. And I'm still making mistakes because Interlock Capital is very much a startup, which is great because I get that entrepreneurial fix that I always need. But I'm hopefully learning along the way a little quicker, right? This grow, fail, learn, try again sort of process. The first time I went through it, it took me a really long time, right? We're talking years, but now that I've kind of been through that, and hopefully for all of you, that process gets condensed so that you can fail really quickly, you can learn from it and try something better the next time. All right, so enough about me. I was hoping to see some more faces on the screen, but that's okay if we don't do that. I was gonna ask you to kind of throw your hands in the air if you think you're ready to raise money for your company, and that's fine if you don't. What I will say is that of the folks who say or believe that they're ready to raise money, if I'm a betting person, I can bet and say that I bet you're not ready. And you know, there's a bunch of reasons why that is, but I can say that because I've seen it a bunch where founders think they're ready to raise money, they go out there and they just get beat down. They get a lot of no's, and it's really challenging. And I can also say it because I did it as well. You know, my last company, I thought I was ready to raise money 3 separate times, and I was not. And so there's a few ways where you can kind of test the waters, and we'll get into those in a little bit. But it's a really important piece of the story here. And so why do so many companies fail at raising capital? Many founders, right? Well, they blame it on all kinds of things. You know, you hear this in San Diego. We've been hearing this for years that, oh, there's no money here, and that's why I can't raise, or the investors don't get it, or the weather. Like, they come up with all kinds of reasons. And after multiple times getting beat down and getting no's, some come to the realization that they might not be ready. And that's okay. Look, we're founders, we're stubborn, right? That passion that drives us to do the crazy things that we do sometimes blinds us a little bit. And so there's a bunch of things that you have to do to prepare and to get to the point where you are ready to raise money. And that's what we'll talk about right here. So first up is a network, a group or system of interconnected people or things. Like, we all know what our network is, right? So my question to you is, do you have a network of angels and VCs that you are already talking to and building relationships with? If your answer is no, you're probably not ready to raise money. It's going to be much, much harder for you if you're trying to build relationships and raise at the same time. So start building those relationships now. If you said yes, that's amazing. That's awesome. It doesn't always mean you're ready, but it is one heck of a good start. So understand that this is a dating process, right? They're investing in you, especially if you're in the pre-seed early stage of a business. You don't have as many metrics. You don't have as many proof points. And so what they're betting on is that you are going to figure out whatever it is that you're doing. You're going to be the one to realize that, hey, what we're doing now is wrong, and we're going to find a way to do better. You know, you don't ask to get married on a first date. Not, I guess some people probably have, but generally speaking, that's not how that works. So don't ask for money when you've just met somebody. Regular updates by email, keep people updated, show progress, show execution, build confidence in you and what you're doing. And it'll make your life a lot easier. And then when you're ready to raise money, they will be ready to fund you as well, potentially. And I'm going to elaborate on a bunch of things as we go through this, but again, keep those questions ready. So part of the way to build a relationship is to share what you're going to do openly with as many people as you can, all the contacts who you've spoken with. Do that thing and then repeat it, right? So you build an email list. You can use MailChimp or PaperStreet or a number of other different tools. You ask every person that you meet with if you can add them to your update list. And then at every meeting, you ask them 2 questions that I always ask. How can you help them, right? Because you want to give. It's important to be able to give. And ask them who else you should meet. Who are the other people I should be meeting with, right? And that's how you kind of grow and expand and improve upon that network. You update your list monthly when you're not raising and weekly when you are. You can adjust that to your own needs, but that's kind of a general rule of thumb. So for each update, what you're going to do is you're going to tell them what you accomplished last month. You're going to tell them what you're going to accomplish in the next month, and then do that thing and repeat this. It's super simple and it's incredibly powerful. I can't count how many compliments I have received from investors and even people who are not investors because I'm sharing what's going on, and I'm sharing the stuff that's not so good as well, right? So that they see that it's not all just roses, you know. And so what you're doing is you're building this relationship just by running your business and just by communicating and sharing. It makes fundraising infinitely easier. And again, when you're ready to raise, they're already going to know you. So you don't have to go through that hurdle. The other thing you need to do is dedicate time to it, right? This is a big thing. I did this completely wrong and paid the price for it. So what do we mean by that? 100% of your time, 110% of your time, all of it. Get your team to take the reins, let go of the business for a while, and focus on the fundraise, right? This could take 2 to 3 months. It's a bit of a grind. It's a process. You got to prepare and plan and execute. You know, I spent, when I raised a couple of million for my last company, I spent the first month and a half trying to raise money while I was running my business. And I don't remember the exact amount, but it certainly was not more than 40% through the fundraise. It was probably less than that. My lead investor called me out on it. He's like, what in the world is taking so long? And I said, I know what the problem is. I will take care of it. I told the team, I'll see you in a few weeks. Take care of business. I focused on it and I was done in 2 weeks, right? So despite the fact that everybody and their brother told me to do what I'm telling you to do, which is focus, I didn't do it and I got burned by it. So instead of being able to finish the race quickly and get back to business and focus on the business, I stretched it out and did neither one of them very well. So that's super important. And then there's momentum. It's another piece that's really important to get moving so that you can be ready to raise, right? And the definition is quantity of motion of a moving body measured as a product of its mass and velocity, right? So what does that kind of mean in real English? It means, does it have substance? Your business, is there a thing there? Is it real? And is it moving in a forward direction, right? So some examples of substance: traction, early adoption, partnerships that are valuable to both parties, not just one-sided, a functional product with actual paying customers. This is a really important one to me personally. You know, the concept of an MVP is great. I love it. What I don't love is that many people think an MVP is not something that people should pay for. And the problem with that is, what do you learn from that MVP? You learn that people are willing to use your product for free. Which is your business, right? You've got to generate money. So I'm much more excited about a minimum sellable product, but that's a sidebar for a completely different conversation. A team that is off the charts with experience or background or knowledge in whatever it is that you're doing. A great technology that works, a compelling solution to a troublesome problem. So what are some examples of motion, the momentum, the motion part of momentum? Well, consistent or rapid growth in multiple meaningful metrics, trusted people, other investors, media, organizations that are out there saying great things about you, consistently hitting difficult to achieve milestones. Again, going back to those updates where you're constantly hitting your milestones and doing the things that you say you're going to do. Graduation from a top tier accelerator is an example of an item. A great go-to-market strategy that you've actually tested and it works, and a repeatable formula for success. I'm going to show an example of this later, but if you can show an investor that, hey, we've got this fire burning, all we need is a little bit more fuel to pour on that fire and it's going to explode. You can do that formula. That's a huge storytelling advantage, right? That's a huge win for you as you're out there speaking with investors. Okay, so we talked about like kind of getting ready and some of the things that are important. And by the way, these are like, this is a fraction of the checklists that are in an investor's mind, right? Everybody's got their own set of checklists and things that they want to see from a company that they choose to invest in. The more of these things you can check off, the better. the fewer reasons they have to say no, and the more reasons they have to get excited about what you're doing. So again, it takes more than just being ready, right? There's an entire process and planning and execution and all that side of it that goes with it. So first off, be organized, run a process, right? There's a lot to this, and you're going to repeat it a bunch of times, right? You're going to get some of that momentum. You're going to line up your tools, which we'll talk about in a minute. You're going to build that story, which is really important because it's got to be a compelling story that stands out. You're going to identify prospects that you're going to target, right? And they need to be the right ones. Don't just spray and pray to investors. Research the investors. Find investors that actually understand your industry and they care about what you're doing. It makes all the world of a difference if you're talking to somebody that gets it, that understands what you're doing. Work your network with warm introductions in order to get the meetings, right? So you can meet with investors or even connectors. Build that excitement, show progress and execution, keep them on the hook and close. And most importantly, this doesn't have to be a miserable experience, right? You can have fun, you can be yourself, and above and beyond everything else during this process, be genuine. People can sniff out if you're fake or you're not being yourself. So it's vitally important to be you because again, at an early stage, investors are investing in you. They need to get to know you and who you are as a person. It's super important. All right, let's talk a little about tools. First of all, you probably want some kind of a lightweight CRM, right? I've used Streak in the past. It's built right into Gmail, so I never have to leave my inbox. It's kind of nice. HubSpot, a lot of folks have good things to say about that. You can also use spreadsheets, Airtable, other things, as long as you're diligent, right? You need to be able to take notes because you're going to be meeting with 100 people, maybe more. You're going to get a lot of introductions and a lot of conversations going. You can't possibly remember it all. You also can't remember whether they're interested or how interested they are, or what the next steps are, or when you're supposed to reach out to them again, right? And so use the tools to track that information for you so that you can be really efficient at your job. Dropbox or some other file repository, because you're likely going to have a data room of some kind. Later stage, the more data that's going to be in that room, but investors are going to say, hey, send me your data room, and it'll have your deck and some financial models and whatever other different things you want to plug into that. Get social, right? If there are people that you don't know, start getting to know them. Use LinkedIn, AngelList, Twitter. Engage with what they're doing and what they're talking about. Add value to the conversation so that when you reach out at some point down the road, they're going to recognize you. They're going to say, oh yeah, I remember we had this thread about whatever it was, and that was great. Sorry, phone's ringing. Email, use it well. We're going to talk a little bit about this, but you know, that update that you send out, it's really important that you communicate efficiently, not just with the people when you're sending decks ahead of time, you know, time it, you know, a day or two before your meeting so that they get the deck, they have a little bit of time to review it, but not too early so that they forget it by the time that you meet. And update them frequently, get them on your list. PowerPoint, Google Slides, of course, the obvious things, but you also have friends and fellow founders and a network. This is probably one of the biggest tools in your tool chest, and you have to learn how to use that properly. You also have to kind of get into the right mindset. And this is something that this book completely changed how I think about fundraising and just pitching in general. And so I will say that Oren, the author, is a little bit over the top when he talks about how he approaches these investor meetings. So I want to make sure I call that out. Like, I don't think in the real world, a lot of what he recommends is completely relevant, but the point he's making is what's important. And that point is you are the prize, right? What you're bringing to the table is the value. Money is kind of a commodity, which you can get from many, many different places in these days. So be bold, take charge, have confidence, and sell your story. And the book was definitely changing for me. I got to know Oren, and this is a decade ago, probably when we first met. But it definitely changed how I felt about the conversations that I was having and the people that I was meeting with. I became more of an equal to them as opposed to somebody who's begging and pleading for money. So that mindset is very important. Okay, so this is where I want you guys to unmute yourselves for like 5 or 10 seconds. And I want you to answer this question. Just start blurting them out. Let me hear them. What's the purpose of the deck? Anybody? Come on.
Tell the story.
To communicate your vision.
Create excitement.
Get to know you.
Visualize what you're saying.
Communicate.
Facilitate a discussion.
Elaborate the
Draw.
vision.
Show your product.
Okay. These are all great, but they're all, I have not heard the right answer yet.
Introduce yourself.
Nope, that's not it either.
Create
Either
FOMO.
Benjamin. These are all great. Okay, everybody, everybody
Trust.
go back on mute, everybody. The right answer is to get the meeting. That's it. Your goal with this deck is to get the meeting. Because when you're talking to them in person, that's when you're going to sell them. That's when they're going to get excited. They're going to get interest in what you're doing because your deck is amazing and it teases them. And this tease is very important. Stop trying to put your entire brain into a deck. Nobody wants to read that. It's a mess. It's hard to consume. Nobody has time for that. Understand that these investors, they see hundreds of decks, sometimes weekly. They have to filter through them. And you have to catch their attention with something unique and simple, right? So come on, don't give them something that's going to put them to sleep at night, right? Stand out, tell your story and be brief. Tease them, show them, don't tell them. I'm going to get into this in a minute. This is something that David Cohen told me from Techstars. He was the founder of Techstars. And it completely changed how I built my decks. And it's hard to do, but it's amazing once you do it right. Hit them in the heart, not the head. Dig into your research, kind of the alligator brain concept versus the analytical brain. The alligator is reactionary and emotional, right? You want to hit people with emotion, something they can relate to and make an emotional decision and get excited about you versus that analytical side of, okay, I'm going to think of 7 reasons why I should say no to this person. Lead with your strengths, right? Everybody's got strengths. Remember those check boxes I was kind of talking about earlier, the different things that you want to do? Lead with the ones that you're checking off really strongly. It could be your team. That's amazing. It could be the fact that you have early traction. It could be a number of different things. And keep them on the edge of their seat every single slide, right? So you literally have probably 30 seconds and 2 slides to determine whether or not they're going to read the next slide and reach out to you and say, hey, let's set up a meeting. So get their attention. Give them something that's exciting and different and unique and stands out. Okay, so let's talk about show me, don't tell me. Telling me, this is an example of telling me, right? We help marketers improve their ability to reach potential customers and close more deals. Okay, great, sounds cool. But all it's really done is cause me to have more questions about you. Is this real? Have you started anything? Do you have a product? How about this, where I'm showing you? We onboarded 50 marketers in 30 days. They're paying us $30 a month, and they've increased their close rates by 27%. Okay, holy cow, that sounds amazing. I definitely want to learn more. I definitely want to get into the next slide. Now, how about this for a kicker, right? We spent $1,000 on ads to get those users, and it's generating 1.5 times that every single month, right? So in 35 or so-ish words, you've shown that you've got something, proven that it's just going to take more fuel to build a bigger fire, right? This is that formula for success that I'm talking about. This is something that you've done and proven and tried, and it's working, right? You're doing the work for the investor here by giving them something like this. That's what I mean by show me, don't tell me. Okay, there's probably a few of you who have heard of Guy Kawasaki's 10, 20, 30 PowerPoint rules. Been around for many, 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 many years. What I will say is, please don't use this as a template. Please, please don't, unless you want to put your investors to sleep. But there's a lot of good to it, right? Use it as a guide. What it is 10 slides, and each slide is a topic. Like, here's the problem, here's the solution, here's the blah, blah, blah. Don't tell your story that way. right? Use it as a guide. These are the things you need to cover, and definitely use 30-point font, which will force you into telling a more concise story. But again, tell your story, right? If you're around a campfire telling somebody a story, you don't throw bullet points at them. You don't throw one slide with an idea at them and the next slide, right? You tell a story. What you do is then you take those 10 points and you stick them in wherever it makes sense. But tell your story first. It's really, really important. And trust me, you're going to be terrible at this. I was terrible at this when I first started doing it. My first fundraising deck went through 28 iterations in 2 months. I looked it up. I've got all the different copies, and the first one looks nothing like the last one. But that's good because you iterate, you change, you evolve, and your deck gets better and better, and you get better and better at telling your story. So this is another book that's super important. You're going to see these terms and different things like that. You can Google them, but this is not an exhaustive list of the terms that you need to know. This is the language of VCs. This is the language of your audience. If you can't speak this language, you're going to be at a slight disadvantage. So it's important you know what these things are. This is the book. It's by Brad Feld. They're on like their 4th edition, I think. And the tagline is kind of tells it all, right? It's be smarter than your lawyer and your venture capitalist. So, excuse me, you can Google this stuff, but if you don't know what to Google, you may not find everything. So I use this, and I had all kinds of different sticky notes and stuff throughout to help me understand the language a little better. And I used it as a reference guide. So when you get that meeting, right, you've gone through all this stuff, you're preparing, you're starting to have meetings. 90% of the time, this is nothing more than a conversation. You're probably not going to go through your deck step by step. You're probably not going to be presenting in front of a big room of people. It's going to be a conversation. They may have already seen part of the deck. They may just have questions. They want to ask follow-on questions. And you know your story, right? You know the talking points. Hopefully you've removed 75% of the crap that was in your first deck that was terrible, right? But you kept that information in your brain. You've practiced in front of a mirror, in front of your friends. I used to practice in front of my dog because she would look at me funny. She'd tilt her head, she'd make a noise, she'd run away, she'd scratch herself, whatever. And it would kind of throw me off, but I would just drive through it. And it taught me how to kind of ignore the noise around me and really get good at telling that story. And so you can answer every question. So you're just going to crush the meeting, right? Because you're prepared. You know your story, you know how to tell it. And regardless of how you put your deck together and you've teased them and you've got that meeting, you can answer the questions and tell your story well. Okay, so let's kind of go through this and sort of repeat for clarity. On the prepare side, right? You're going to build your network. You're going to ask for advice. This is kind of an important one, right? When you're meeting with investors, especially the first time, you're not going to ask them for money. Don't do that. There's a saying, and you've probably heard it before. If you ask them for money, you'll get advice. If you ask for advice, you might get money someday. It's relatively true. Ask for advice. Get to know them, right? These are smart people that you're meeting with. They could be previous founders that are angel investors that have a lot of knowledge. Date when you're raising. When you're not raising, don't do it while you're raising. Try and date beforehand. Build measurable momentum. Kind of put some theories in place, test them. Create that formula for success if you can get to that point. Keep everyone updated, right? And then execute on the other side. Prepare your tools, research your targets, be hyper organized and run a real process. Read up, be smart. Get in that right mindset, tell your story, inject those important items in there. Show me, don't tell me, practice like crazy, get your story down. I found that when I would prepare for a pitch or a presentation or whatever, I would first write it out and type it out and maybe print it and sort of read from it and get the cadence of telling that story. And what I found is after a few times of doing that, I would begin to change the words so that they flowed better. And they were just, I spoke like, I said them like it was just me talking. And once you get to that point, then it's much easier. It's not about memorization. It's about you telling a story or a specific point. And so it makes that presentation a lot easier. And when they ask those questions, you've already got it. You've talked about it to yourself a bunch of times or to your dog or wherever. Provide those meaningful updates to your investors as things are progressing. Here's who's involved. Here's what we did last week. Here's how the fundraise is progressing, and raise that money and get back to work. Do it quickly. So that's kind of the high level. Would love to open it up to questions. I hope that I teased a high level version of the many things that need to be done here. And I hope I gave you some tactical things that you can use. But again, what I'm hoping we can do now is sort of drill in a little bit on some areas or dive in a little deeper based on what your needs are and what you guys are struggling with or trying to learn and understand as you consider going to raise money.
Thank you so much, Al. That was wonderful. We really appreciate that. And so let's go ahead and take some questions from the audience. Excuse me. First of all, were there, Stephen, were there any questions that we needed to address first from the chat?
Yeah, there was just one question I think everybody was saving to the end to ask you directly. But the question was, do you have any examples of good slide decks that you recommend people go and see, or any presentations that you know of that people can go in and check it out to learn from their example to get better at it themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I should prepare something like that. I'll do a little research after, but if you do some Googling, there have been a number of people who have published their seed round deck, like well-known companies that you've heard of before, and they said, hey, this is how we raised our seed round, or this is how we raised our Series A. I don't have any jumping out off the top of my head, but I've seen them come across social channels in various places a number of times. So maybe try and go out there and Google them, and I'll take a note to try and do the same.
And I know, Al, that people ask me oftentimes for this, and I always want to caution people that it's more than just your slides, right? It's more than just the slides that you put together. It's your ability to impart that information. I wanted to ask one question that I did notice also in the chat before we open it to everybody else is, we are going to be sharing this video recording, but are you willing to share your slides from today as well?
Yeah, I think it's probably possible. Let's talk about that. I want to make sure it stands alone, right? Without the additional vocal context. I haven't, this is a new deck. It's the first time I've presented it. So sure, I think if we decide it's good as a standalone, I'm okay. Versus, having the verbal context to follow along with it.
Tanya, you will be posting the recording, right?
Yes, the recording will be posted as of tomorrow and on our YouTube channel, which is there in the chat. So thank you for reminding me, Martin. Okay, so let's open it up to questions.
Can I ask the first question? You guys mind?
Please.
Oh, Liam, go ahead.
What are some good tips for storytelling the problem? I mean, for that first 30 seconds.
Yeah, so I think what is really important, and this is different for everybody, right? There are 100 different ways to tell stories. And if you look at kind of how TV shows or movies or other things are created, right? There's always that sort of initial hook. Songs even have a hook, right? They have this thing that's catchy and gets your attention and makes you want to do more. And so I would say, figure out what your strengths are. Like as you put together your list of check boxes of things that you think investors are going to care about, some of which were in the deck. Pick the ones that you just destroy, right? We are awesome at this. I have early traction, or we have paying customers, or, we have a team that is so credentialed and so experienced that it's going to blow the doors off of somebody, right? So you're going to want to kind of lead with that. And other things you can do too is you can kind of do the tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them, and then tell them what you told them sort of model, where you tease a couple of things in the beginning, like, hey, we are a company focused on doing XYZ. We've got X number of customers and this much revenue, and we've grown this % over the next, over the past few months, right? That's like a complete tease of everything. But what it does is it tells me as an investor that, okay, these guys, they're generating revenue. They seem to have customers. They're growing. Great. I want to read more, right? I want to click that next slide. And then throughout that, you tell the story behind what it is you're doing and why you're doing it, and why you and your team and everything you've done so far is going to be the one that's going to win. And then you can kind of wrap up at the end with that similar thing of like, hey, here's the 3 things I want you to remember about us. Set up a time, let's meet, right? I'd love to get to know you and share more. Is that helpful, Liam?
Very much so. I just asked because I used to travel around Southern California, go to pitch competitions for like USC, UCLA, because I live up here in LA. And there was one guy that was pitching, and he's probably the best pitcher I've ever seen. He really just got to his story and pulled on the heartstrings straight off the bat, and it was great to watch the way that people really leaned into it. So I was just curious whether a personal story is a great way to start off that storytelling, or whether people lean more towards the business problem and its impact on society is more of a hook.
No, I think it very much depends, right? There are a lot of people who start their story with a personal challenge, right? A personal story, where it's more about, here's why I started this thing, because I used to fight with this, or I had this personal challenge, or whatever. Like, that's an amazing story to tell. Like, that out of the gate will say, okay, this person has lived and breathed the problem, maybe is still living and breathing the problem, has a solution to that problem, or wants to find a solution, and they are super passionate about it because it has caused them potentially years of pain and agony. So yeah, absolutely, that's a great way to tell the story, and that's one of those sort of heartstring stories, like you're saying, right? You know, I say hit them in the heart, not the head. That's a great example of that, you know, especially if it's something that other people can relate to, or find a way to relate to. You know, a lot of times you'll have folks that say, here's, you know, it's not a fictional person, but it may be one of their customers. Amy was this person. This is what her life looked like before. It was a mess of, I don't know, spreadsheets and noise and time and frustration. And then we came along and we gave her this beautiful thing, and now she's doing these things and much happier, and et cetera, et cetera. So there's a number of ways to sort of bring it down to reality a little bit and put some show me, right? That's a part of that show me piece, where it's not just you're telling me what you're doing, you're actually showing me real people, real money, real revenue, real situations that you're helping with.
I've got
Yeah.
I have a question, if I may. Hi, Al. Great presentation. Thanks so much sharing a world of knowledge with everyone. My question has to do with targeting investors, and you said, you know, do research on who would be appropriate angels or investors in your company. Would you say that taking into account the sort of investing paperwork involved would matter? And the reason I say this is because I work with a lot of founders who are raising money, but are finding that certain investors or angel groups or whatnot work with convertible notes versus safes. And, you know, founders are getting all sorts of advice as to what types of safes to use and all this stuff. So do you have any insight as to how to go about raising and targeting angels that on documents that would be favorable towards company, and how to sell that?
Yeah, you know, I think it's an interesting question. And if I understand it correctly, you know, I think the good news is safes are getting very, very popular and becoming much more accepted as an alternative for, I would say more an alternative for convertible notes versus, you know, say equity rounds. And the beauty of a safe is, for those of you that don't know, Y Combinator created these. There's, you know, 2 or 3 different versions of them. And in theory, you don't need to change them. Everybody knows what they are. They're a known entity. So that's great for the founder. They don't have to deal with as much of the legal fees. It's also great for the investors, right? Convertible notes, they're all different. Like, you got to review those things. You got to dig in. You got to get legal involved or dig in yourself. And that's something that some investors might not want to do. It's certainly something that causes founders more expense. And so I think safes are great. I think it's a nice way to keep things clean and simple, especially in the early stages when you're just trying to get back to work and you don't want to fight with, documents and red lines and trying to change them to be perfect for everybody, because it's just a hard process to do. So I don't know if that answered your question. I think, I think it's less and less of a problem. I would say maybe, a couple of years ago or whatever, when safes first came out, they were questioned a little bit more than they are now. Now they're becoming very, very frequent. We see them all the time. And, it also helps alleviate the need for earlier deals for a lead investor, right? Like a lead investor is somebody who's going to help put the documents together with you. They're going to pick your valuation with you and things like that. Whereas with the safe, you don't necessarily need a lead investor to dive in on diligence, right? You need some smart investors to help you with your valuation and things like that. But it just makes the whole process a lot cleaner, especially in those early rounds where going through all the formalities is more of a hassle than it's worth.
And Al, would you say that it's up to the entrepreneur to propose what instrument they use, or because I see so often they end up relying on the very people that they should be viewing as maybe not so much as a friend when they're in those negotiations. And so do you feel like they should come prepared with the instrument they want to use and all of that beforehand, or who should they,
I think it's important to do that. Like, do your research, right? Talk to other founders, talk to other, investors, see what people prefer and why, and for what stage, right? A lot of it depends on where you are as a business. And it's completely okay to have an opinion on this. Now, there may be, my example is one of them where I went down a path that I probably shouldn't have gone down, but that's the path my lead investor wanted to go down. And it was fine. It didn't crush me, but it did cost me a little bit extra to do it. And while, it was a little more painful, it was worth it for me to have this particular lead investor. So, everything's flexible. There's no black and white answer to that, I think, but I would absolutely know enough to where you can have a relatively strong opinion about what you want to do.
Right. All right. More questions from the audience?
Yeah, there's a question here from Raj. Well, first of all, Al, thank you so much for doing this amazing workshop. Raj says, what types of things do you recommend putting in the monthly updates on your mailing list? I think specifically for potential investors.
Yeah. So I would say go check out Paper Street and at a minimum look at some of their templates. So what they do is they give you a very clean and easy interface, and it's built specifically to do investor updates, among many other features that they provide. But they kind of have sort of templates that you can use, and here's this section, here's that section, here's this section, right? So, first section is who the heck are you and what do you do, right? These updates, a lot of people get a lot of updates. They may have met with you a month ago and they're getting their first update, and 100 companies later that they've met with, they may not remember what you do. So start with that, like quick little 2 sentences. This is what we do as a reminder. So many people forget to do that. But it's really, really valuable. And, go through a number of things. Like it depends on what you want to accomplish, right? If you're really early stage and you're just trying to build your team or find some people to dive in with you or to build a part of the product, maybe that's front and center. Last week or last month, we said we were going to do XYZ. Here's the progress we made. And don't be afraid to share challenges, right? Like, hey, we didn't hit it, and here's why, and here's what we're going to do better next time. That's okay. Like I got more compliments from investors and sometimes more replies from investors when I had challenges and I opened up to them about them and I asked them for help. That's huge to be able to do that, to show it. One, it shows that you're coachable and you're open to the fact and you're honest. Like, excuse me, investors, you don't necessarily want to see just all happiness all the time because they're probably not going to believe it, right? It's rare that startups go smoothly. So be open, be honest, tell the truth. You don't have to fully open the kimono, but say, hey, we stumbled here, and here's what we're going to do to fix it. And if you know anybody that can help us with this, that would be amazing. And so it could be things like financials though, too. If you're at a stage where you're trying to grow and you're testing some ad campaigns and you want to put that stuff in there, changes to the team. You know, it's any number of different things. Like if you go to Guy Kawasaki's 10, 20, 30, there's 10 things on that list that you could talk about, right? And you don't have to do all of it. And I don't recommend you do all of it all the time, but you know, a lot of time it's about your goals. You know, if you're using OKRs, or if you're using KPIs, you know, key performance indicators and things like that, put those in there and measure them. Show that you're measuring your, you know, what you believe is going to determine your level of success. If you have a KPI that says, if we onboard X number of users every single month, and when we do that, we generate additional, you know, positive revenue, then put that in there and track it. If that is super important, and share that information. And then always have asks, and be specific with those asks. Don't say, introduce me to investors you think would like this. No. Say, I want to meet this person at this fund. I want to meet this person at this fund. And here's why. Here's why I think they'd be a great fit, right? It kind of goes back to that research, your target, your list of people who you want to be on your cap table. You want to be investors because you've researched them and you know they know your space. So be very specific, because, you know, again, investors see a lot of these. And if they say, introduce me to anybody you think might fit, well, all right, I'm going to keep that in the back of my mind because nobody's coming to mind right away. But the reality is I may not ever think of anybody. Whereas if you give me a list of 5 or 10 people, some folks even put their entire CRM, like, here's all the people I want to target in the next month. Go in and check a box if you know them, or put your name next to this cell in the spreadsheet. I've seen that done a bunch too. And that's a very clean way for somebody to, boom, click, scan. Oh, I know that person. Boom, put my name there. And then you know who to reach out to and how to get an intro. So long-winded answer. Hopefully it was helpful.
How do you get a list like that?
By meeting people, right? Well, a number of ways. One, go on AngelList, start finding investors who are actively investing, preferably in similar companies, right? You can research, you can look up a company that's very similar to yours on AngelList and see who some of their investors are. You can use Crunchbase for that as well. All these very free tools, very accessible, very relatively easy to use. You know, you can dig in sometimes on LinkedIn. Investors will put their portfolio out there. Do research for, you know, angel groups and different things like that. But also your network is a big part of that. You know, as I mentioned, you know, in the slides, there's 2 questions you want to ask. One, how can I help? And at the end of every call, how can I help? And who else should I be meeting with? And that's how you continue to expand and grow. And that list I'm talking about doesn't all have to be angels, right? There are a number of people that add tons of value because they just connect, they're connectors, right? They're good at saying, oh, I know this person over here who would be a great fit because he loves kind of the stuff that you're doing. And so he'll make that connection, or she will make that connection. So, you know, there's a number of ways to do it. And I think those are 3 or 4 different good examples of how to.
Thanks, Al, for the workshop. Really appreciate it. And nice seeing you again.
Yeah, you too.
On advisors, how soon do startups typically get an advisor? And then what is that typical equity that they get? And what is that like cliff timeline you normally see?
Yeah, great question. So I'll tell you kind of how we did it. We didn't bring any advisors on board unless we'd worked with them for a very long time and they were just giving for the sake of giving, and they were adding value, right? It was, you know, I want to say our first advisor, we came on board before we got into Techstars. So we were super early and we were still figuring things out. We had, you know, a couple of people that were using our product. This person had been really helpful, just loved what we were trying to do, liked us a lot, had great advice, and he just kept giving. Anytime we reached out to him, he's like, hey, what's going on? How can I help? And just was constantly valuable. And so, you know, I think 6 months into that, you know, we said, hey, we want to make this official. And, you know, he was super excited and blown away. And it was a really fun, great moment. And so There's, and I'm blanking on the name of it. I think the Founder Institute put something out, and I want to say it's a FAST agreement. Maybe look that up. And essentially, it's kind of a grid of the stage of your company and the level of effort that they're going to provide. And I use that as a guide for the amount of equity that you provide those investors, right? So obviously, the earlier the stage and the more help that they're going to provide, the more equity they get, right? The later the stage and the less help they're going to provide, the lower the equity that they would get. But it's a clean starting point, and I use that pretty much religiously to determine where somebody fit. And then you show this to them and you say, hey, I think you fit here based on what we expect of you and what we think you can provide, and here's where we think our company is, and this is what we'd like to offer you. And I don't recall anybody really balking at what our estimations were in that. And it was a pretty clean, simple way to do it.
Thanks, Al. I think we have a question in chat. I think this is what they're asking. If any advice, and I think they have a healthcare service and their healthcare service MVP requires a facility which requires significant funds before they start generating funds, how would they go about that?
Yeah, right. I mean, I think I personally have never had to do something like that. But this is, I believe, and again, my opinions are what they are, their opinions, get advice from multiple people. But I think this is an example of where you really want to find somebody who is so passionate in what you're doing and the space, and they believe in you and what you're doing, that they're willing to take a really big risk, right? Of putting a lot of capital in that may support a little bit of your business, but really supports just a facility because they believe in what you're doing and they're willing to jump in and take that risk. That's, to me, and I could be wrong, but to me, that's something where unless you have some kind of proof points that say that we already have the formula, we know how this is going to work, we've tested it in some way, I can prove it to you. Now we just need a facility that will allow us to take in money and grow. I think, it needs to be somebody that is just so well versed in what you're doing in the industry that they get it and they understand it and they're willing to take that big leap, right? Because that could be a big leap if that facility is where you're going to be testing everything and learning everything from the first time. Does that make sense? That was a chat question, so I don't know if anybody can answer if that made sense.
It made sense to me, and so I think it'll make sense to them as well. Sorry about that.
Nice siren you got there.
Yeah, thank you. Right
hey Al, it's Aaron over at Pedestal. Thanks for sharing. Super informative. I have a quick question. You talked about how you should talk to investors right before you're ready to raise. If you have part of your exit strategy, right? I've heard from certain people that you should talk to the companies that you're looking to acquire, that you want to acquire you, right? Very early, but I'm anxious to do that because, I don't want them to put their time and money into developing what we're making. But is that something that I should just squelch that anxiety and start talking to the companies that we want from day one to acquire us?
Good question. I was very open and spoke to pretty much everybody in our industry. And, fast forward when it was time to sell our company and we decided we wanted to do that, I had 30 conversations in 3 days going, right? Because I already had relationships and it wasn't an uncomfortable sort of conversation. But sure, there's always a balance. You don't, again, I keep using this silly kimono analogy. You don't want to fully open that kimono and give them everything. But what I did wasn't necessarily to talk about acquisition. It was to talk about how we can help each other, right? Like, what can our product do for your customers? And what in return do we get for that, right? What kind of value can we add to you? And so I would treat it like, a learning experience. Like, go to them and say, hey, we're kind of in a similar space, but we're doing something very tangential that seems like there might be some value for you. What are some of the big challenges you have, right? Open that conversation to, what are you guys trying to do that you wish you could, but you can't because maybe you're bigger or you don't have people dedicated to it. But man, if there's just a good solution for this, we'd be all in. And ask those questions to all of these potential long-term partners, build relationships that way. And what ends up happening is, again, back to the ask them how you can help them. That's one thing, but also ask them, in this case, don't ask who you should be meeting with next. Say, hey, I'm wondering if you can introduce me to XYZ person in your company, because I'd like to talk to them about this particular thing. Next thing you know, you're getting introductions to all these different people in that company. They're talking about you at lunchtime, assuming we ever go back to having lunches together and things like that. But that's how we built one of our strongest relationships. By the time I got to the CEO, he's like, I have 7 people telling me about you guys. Like, what the heck is going on here? Who are you? Like, we need to talk. And then they bring up well, hey, when you're talking about a partnership, guarantee every company is thinking, okay, we can partner with these guys. We can try and build this thing, but we're going to suck at it, or we can just acquire them. Right? That's always going on in the back of their minds. Maybe you talk to the business, the corp dev people, which, if they do exist in the company, or maybe you're talking to the CEOs, it's always a part of the conversation and it comes up. And don't be in a rush to talk about it. Like, it'll happen sort of naturally, I think, in many, many cases, especially if you guys are diving in and going, wow, if you can do this for us, here's the value we can bring to you, and it's really mutually beneficial, then that acquisition conversation is a very natural next step.
Makes sense. Appreciate that. That's kind of what we're trying to do. So thank you.
Yeah.
We had another question in chat earlier. Someone asks, if you are giving your story and you tend to get very emotional, this specific person says that their eyes start to leak. Would you say that's detrimental to a pitch, or does it add to it? What are your opinions on that?
Wow, I'd love to know the context of this one. I mean, I'm assuming, making an assumption here that, if somebody's getting teary-eyed over a story, it's because they have some serious emotional ties to this thing. And, it kind of goes back to conversation I think we were having with Liam, where, how do you tell your story and how do you get that hook? If I see somebody that's super emotional about something they're doing, it is absolutely a positive. Especially if they found a way to solve this problem, and it means that much to them that when they're pitching to some random person like me, that they're still getting teary-eyed over it. I think that's amazing. I would love to see something like that personally. So if that's the context and that's really what's going on, then yeah, I don't see that as a problem at all. I think that's a huge positive.
I had a question. This is Enzo from the Rec. I watch a lot of Shark Tank, and I always see it's common that a lot of pitches are good pitches, pretty decent, but they don't have any traction, no sales, and then they just get destroyed, especially by Kevin O'Leary. I don't know if you're familiar with, but probably, right? So what's your recommendation on that? Should you really talk to investors only after you have at least some cash flow, or could you do before, more for a mentorship kind of thing?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say, just to make sure we're all on the same page, is that's a made-for-TV show. It's very sensationalistic. Any reality TV show is going to be clipped and massaged so that it's you get the wow factor kind of response rates. So in the many pitches that I have done with the many investors, I've never experienced anything that even remotely resembles Shark Tank. So I would not worry about that. You know, you're going to find some investors who are going to tell you what they think. I tend to be one of those people, right? And I, as a founder, appreciated that. Like, I would rather know what you think than you be wishy-washy and me wonder if I should keep pressing you for, you know, investment. I would rather you tell me what you think about my business, my company, my deck, whatever, because I want to know what my faults are. I want to know what I need to improve for the next meeting. So some investors are going to be more forthcoming. I think, you know, there's going to be a lot who are not. I think the reality is most of them are just going to ask hard questions. And if you're prepared, you can answer most of those hard questions. And if you don't know an answer, be honest, don't fake it. Just say, hey, you know what? That's a really good question. I don't necessarily have an answer for you, but I'm going to think about that. Or I know I can get that answer. I just don't have it handy. So I will follow up and get that for you, right? Like whatever makes sense for that scenario, but don't hold back on talking to investors because you don't check all the boxes, right? Now, again, it goes back to if you don't check enough boxes, you may not be ready to raise money, but you're certainly ready to have a conversation and to learn and to ask for advice. Never, ever, ever hold back from doing that.
Thank you so much. That's very helpful. And kind of a little follow-up question, if you don't mind, on that.
Yeah, of course.
I've heard from founders that even talking to investors or posting about their product or service on social media before it's out, they have a lot of worry about someone else stealing their idea. What do you make of that?
You're talking about founders being worried about somebody stealing their idea?
Yeah, either a potential investor or like someone random because they posted on social media. You know, I've heard that.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's a bunch of answers to this. I'm a very open person. And the reason that I'm open and sharing is because I have experienced firsthand people that I've met with that I thought going into it that this is a waste of my time. I don't know why I'm meeting this random person and I'm going to tell them about my business. That turned into some of the best conversations or introductions or led me to things that I never dreamed of before. So I guess the point I'm trying to make with this is if you're not out there talking about what you're doing and sharing what you're doing, you're not going to get the connections you need that are going to potentially make or break your business in various ways or advance your business in ways that you never thought possible. You just never know what people know and who they know until you're out there talking about stuff. So I am of the mindset that, you know, again, it's a balance. It's not black and white, open the full kimono and tell them everything, but you have to talk about what you're doing. You have to get out there. And to kind of put another spin on this or another angle to it, you know, you'll hear people saying this all the time. If you're following like VC Twitter or founder Twitter or whatever, like ideas, they're not worth anything. Execution is everything, 100% everything. You know, people tell me their ideas and what they're building in early stage stuff all the time. I don't have time to go build that. I don't have the desire to go build that, not like you do. So, you know, I'd already be at a serious disadvantage, even if I did decide I wanted to do something like that. But so I don't put much stock into worrying about that. I think maybe it doesn't apply in all cases if there's like some kind of, you know, technical crazy advantage that nobody's built before and you haven't got a patent yet. But that's just a matter of, you know, not sharing everything. You know, you share the result. Like, I'm able to do this with my technology. I can prove it. I can't open the car. I can't let you look under the hood yet. But, you know, anyway, hopefully that sort of answers that question too.
Yes, it definitely does. Thank you so much, all. Very helpful.
Yeah. This is fun, you guys. Who else has got a question? Love this part.
I know I tend to get the most out of these Q&As. I love them too.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Hi, Diana.
Hi, my name is Deanna Hertz.
Deanna,
from Sea
sorry, I
Monkey.
guessed wrong.
Yeah, it's okay. Sea Monkey Do. I was wondering, as long as we're connecting with people, could I please put you on my email list just so that I can let you know how I'm doing?
I would appreciate that. I'd love to meet with you first and learn about your business and see what you're doing and all that. So I would say reach out to me. You can connect on Twitter or wherever. I won't throw my email address on the recording, but you know, Tanya can connect us, or Stephen probably can as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I've got a quick question. There's a you know, there's a lot of check boxes for what people consider a good MVP. You were talking about an MSP, a very interesting concept. I think that the guys at Y Combinator talk about a lot, where they were referring to a lot of research into MVPs saying essentially the same thing. If a customer is not willing to pay for it, how do you know? How do you know it's a viable business? What are some of your other criteria for MSP that varies from an MVP? Or do you have any differences?
Yeah, I don't really have many, honestly. You know, I'd rather skip the step that only gives you half the story and get to the one that gives you the full story. Now, it's possible you can't get there, right? It's possible that that MVP you built just isn't worth charging for, right? People aren't willing to pay. And that's good information, right? That's good to know, because it means, okay, well, what would, you know, it allows you to ask the questions and speak to the people who are telling you, yeah, not ready to pay for this, to say, okay, well, what are the pains that we can solve that you would be willing to pay for? That's a great way to open that door, that conversation. So, you know, I do, like I said, prefer the MSP, but if you leverage an MVP in the right way and you're not charging, you just have to be really, really diligent about, I don't know, hinting at pricing or testing pricing, saying, hey, we're going to give it to you for a month for free, but then we want to charge you this. What do you think? Right? You can do things like that to sort of glean and learn from your customers what they're thinking.
Thank you.
Just a quick note, I'm going to drop the survey link into chat. We'd love it if you can take this quick 2-minute survey to give Al some feedback, to give the rec some feedback, so we can continue doing things like this. It's been a great time so far.
Hey, Al, this is Vinay from Tibra Health. Sorry, I think my question got lost in the chat. I wanted to get your thoughts or feedback on, you know, crowdfunding approach, like, you know, you have a start engine, and is that too desperate, or what do you feel are your recommendations between a crowdfunding versus the angel route?
Yeah, awesome question. Very timely. And I assume you're talking equity crowdfunding, like, you know, what you mentioned in WeFunder and Republic and all these different places.
Correct.
I would say if you asked me even as short as a year ago, I would say that there's probably some negative sentiment around crowdfunding in the investor community. I would say right now it's very different. I think it's awesome. Like, you know, part of what I built is something that's accessible to not just seasoned angels, but also aspiring angel investors. Now, we're not crowdfunding, right? You have to be accredited in what we do, but I'm a huge fan of this, right? It opens up opportunity not just for regular people to invest in startups, but it opens up opportunities for the founders to find new and creative ways to get investment dollars for their business. There's also clever funding models that focus more on revenue and less on owning equity and different things like that. So you know, and at this point, I would say it's looked down upon much less than it was even as short as a year ago by the investing community. And I'm seeing, you know, a number of companies who are established and have VCs who are opening up rounds on WeFunder and Republic and all these different places because they can, and because they want to. You know, they may have a crowd of users that wants to be able to invest in their company. They can now open that up to them. That's amazing. And so, you know, I would say if there are investors who are really sort of looking down upon that type of investment, you know, in a year or two, I think they're kind of going to be left behind. They're going to have to change and adapt and evolve like the rest of us are doing, or, you know, it might be a little painful for them to get into deals that maybe started with crowdfunding, or they're doing crowdfunding alongside a regular raise, or whatever the case may be.
So,
Al,
sorry. Steve, did you want to ask maybe just one last question and then we'll let Al take us away? Yeah.
Yes, Al, you mentioned Crunchbase and Start Engine and Refunder. Anything else? Any other companies that are on top of your mind?
For crowdfunding specifically?
Yes.
Yeah, so Crunchbase is not crowdfunding, but the one that you mentioned and Vinay mentioned, WeFunder, and then Republic is another one. Those are pretty popular crowdfunding platforms. There are absolutely others out there, and I've used a couple of them, but I don't know them all well enough to sort of rate and rank who's doing the best out there.
And there's different types for different things. So yeah, whether it's equity or yeah. So Al, what would you like to leave the audience with as we wrap this up here? Any final thoughts to take us away?
Oh man. Oh, so much that has been said. I think I'll tell you, there's very few times in an entrepreneur's journey where you're the most excited. And I think going back to another dating analogy, like when you first meet somebody, it's always the most exciting and you're learning about things and you're learning about each other. And I think startups are very similar, right? You guys, for those of you who are at early stages, it is a super exciting time. You're getting to know the environment around you and the people that you're talking to and getting a sense of who's excited and who you can build relationships with and what your business can be and things like that. So I'd say really embrace that, really dive in, and if you do decide that fundraising is the right thing for you, do that as well as you plan on doing your company, right? You're going to give everything you've got to your business. You're going to give everything you've got to grow this company, to disrupt your industry, to do whatever it is that you're going to do. Do that, put that same dedication to the fundraise and the process, both before you're actually raising and during the raise and even after the raise, because it makes a difference and it will help you do that much, much easier than if you don't put that full effort in.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Great advice. And thank you everyone for being here. Like I said, this was the last workshop of the summer semester. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you're interested in joining the next cohort at the REC, which will be starting up again the last week of August. And yeah, it was great to see everybody. We will see you again soon. Thanks again, Al. And take care.
Thanks, everybody. This was great. Appreciate it.
Al.
It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Al.
Thanks so much, Al.
Great workshop.
Yeah, really pretty.
Thank you, Al.
Thank you, Al.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tanya Hertz, and I'm the director of the Regional Entrepreneurship Center, the Rec Innovation Lab at San Diego Miramar College. And I'd like to thank our partners at this time and give a special thanks to SDSU's Lavin Center, the SDSU Zip Launchpad. We'd like to thank the California Entrepreneurship Educators Conference. Also like to thank Harness, the Brink SBDC at USD, San Diego Unified Schools. We'd also like to thank the School of Entrepreneurship and Technology, High Tech High, the Regional Advisory Committee, Alex Waters at the Jacobs Center, Connect All, 21IQ Labs, Startup Quest, Productified. I'd like to thank Course Key and Tech Coast Angels. Thank you to Village Up, City Heights Development Corporation, San Diego Angel Conference, Startup San Diego, SBDC, SCORE San Diego, We Are Kingdom, New Media Rights, San Diego Tech Hub, Origin 63, Ambrosio 15, OmniSync, Optima Office, Proven Recruiting, Craft Leadership, GSNL Consulting. Thank you to all of our partners. We couldn't do what we do without you. Thank you.